Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Joint Council Parking Authority meeting of March 24th, 2007. At this time, I'd like to remind those in attendance to please silence your cell phones or other communication devices. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Przynski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Leonardis.
Here. I'd like at this time to invite everyone in this room to join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Joining us this evening are 23 students. Yes. Our 23 students from Kakahashi, Japan. And these are exchange students. A week ago we had our Irish delegates, and this evening we have students from Japan this evening. And I'd like to invite them to come forward at this time and join me at the podium. And I will be presenting a commendation on their behalf. So please come forward and join me up here. You can all stand around me if you'd like. Come this way. Don't be shy. You're on TV. We're all on TV. Everybody all set? Great. So the proclamation reads, whereas the Kakahashi project, which means Bridge for Tomorrow, is a fully government-funded program which aims to promote a deeper mutual understanding among the people of Japan and the people of the United States, and to encourage the participants to take active roles as youth ambassadors on a global level. And where the town of Los Gatos welcomes 23 Japanese students who are visiting Los Gatos High School from March 22nd to March 25th for a cultural exchange and homestay, and whereas the students are from whereas the students are from the area affected by the 2011 Great East Japan Earthquake and tsunami, and whereas in exchange, 23 Los Gatos High School students will visit Japan this summer with a trip fully funded by the Japanese government. Now, therefore, the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos does hereby render with special appreciation and accommodation to the Kakahashi Project and the youth ambassadors for their contribution to the spirit of global friendships and exchange. Join me in welcoming them formally. Congratulations. This is for you to bring back. Would you like to say a few words to the audience this evening? Do I have the right spokesperson? Yes. Feel free to say a few words if you would like. You don't have to if you don't want.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Hello. I'm Arata Ohas. Nice to meet you. We are support our kids. We are from Iwate Prefecture, Miyagi Prefecture, and Fukushima Prefecture. We got to Seattle 1 week ago. We visited the public market, the Museum of Flight and downtown and so on. We really enjoyed there. We got here to, sorry. We visited we visited a high school of Seattle, and we did presentation about Japan, and we could make many friends there. We got to here to do the presentations about Japanese food, art, nature, and festival with Japanese earthquake. We want everyone to know about Japan earthquake. And we are staying at home with family in Los Gatos. We are enjoying very much. And we have to leave here tomorrow, but we would like to communicate with everyone. So please ask us anything about Japan if you have the question about Japan. So we would like to ask you about America. Please ask us. Thank you for this great time. Thank you.
Thank you again for coming. We have something for everyone here, all 23. It's a pin that is the pin for the official Town of Los Gatos. You can wear it on your lapels. So thank you very much. All right. And thank you for staying in Los Gatos and choosing Los Gatos. Next on our agenda is our closed session report. I'd like to ask our town attorney about that.
Good evening. Prior to tonight's session, councilmen in closed session to discuss existing litigation and for the performance evaluation of the town attorney. As to both of these items, no action was taken and requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. At this time, I would like to invite anyone who would like to speak on any item which is not on the agenda to fill out a speaker card. They look like this. So far, I have one. And we will begin the verbal communications now with Susan Kenkel. Actually, this is for agenda item 1, so I have no speaker cards on any items. So seeing none coming forward, we'll move on to our first public hearing, which is subdivision application M13-003, Environmental Impact Report EIR-13-002, property location 100 Prospect Avenue. And the property owners are the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary. We are considering a proposed subdivision of a 10.3 acre parcel into 17 lots on a property zoned R1-20. And I will refer to staff for a report.
Good evening, Council. You did receive a desk item for this application. One item is a letter from Lee Quintana that was received today, and the other item is the sheet from the town's historic resources inventory on the stone house. The project site is located on the west side of Prospect Avenue, east of College Avenue. Kimball Avenue and Reservoir Road tie into Prospect along the property frontage. It is a 10.3-acre property that's zoned R120. Surrounding properties are all developed with single-family residences. The Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary is the applicant for this project. They are also the inhabitants of the property at 100 Prospect, as well as 82 Prospect, a separate property that is known as Villa Holy Names. The Villa Holy Names property is not part of the subdivision application and will be retained by the sisters, and they will continue to use that property for residential purposes. The properties below the project site on College are zoned R18, and the remainder of the properties surrounding the site are zoned R120. The property was purchased by the applicant in 1945. It was developed with the convent and conference facilities in 1952. It does operate under an existing conditional use permit that was approved by the town. The existing buildings on the site total 83,367 square feet. The facility operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week under the use permit. At the time of the application, there were 66 sisters still living on the site, and it remains a fully functional facility with conferences and all the activities that are allowed under the use permit. The use permit itself would cease upon recordation of the final map following approval of the project. The vesting tentative map is being proposed to subdivide the 10.3-acre site into 17 lots. The items that are proposed to be vested, inclusive of fees and town regulations, zoning ordinance, site development ordinance, et cetera, are all listed in the staff report to the Planning Commission, which is attachment 1 to your report. 21 lots would be possible under the R120 zoning. However, the applicant did extensive analysis and determined that the most appropriate building sites based on topography, trees, trying to minimize site disturbance would be 17, so the proposal is for 17 lots. The applicant does intend to sell the proposal or sell the approved map following approval to a developer that who would come in, do the demolition, and propose the specific home designs, and those would all go through an individual architectural and site process. The sisters conducted a number of community meetings and have kept their neighbors informed of the project as it moved through the planning process. It really has been a model for community outreach. You did receive a number of letters of support for the project, some attached to the Planning Commission report, some attached to the council report. Although a mitigated negative declaration could have been prepared for the project, the sisters elected to do an environmental impact report to fully vet the project, provide all the information possible to the public. A number of technical studies were prepared, including arborist, historic, geotechnical, stormwater, and traffic analysis. We did have all those reports reviewed, peer-reviewed by town consultants. A mitigation monitoring and reporting plan has been prepared, which includes a number of mitigation measures for air quality, biological and cultural resources, hazardous materials, geologic hazards, energy, and noise. And all of those mitigation measures are also incorporated into the conditions of approval for the project. The Planning Commission considered the request to subdivide the property on February 26th, and the Commission recommended that the EIR be certified, that the mitigation monitoring and reporting plan be adopted, and the subdivision application be approved. The Commission was concerned about traffic associated with the future development and demolition. We do have a demolition plan that includes provisions allowing the town to restrict hours around when school is in session, which is one of the things the commission wanted to see done. And the only change to conditions was noted in the staff report. Initially, the commission had included a condition that the use permit for the property be amended to apply only to the Villa Holy Names property. Staff subsequently changed the condition when the sisters advised that they only intend to use the property for residential purposes. So the use permit will no longer be needed. The use permit can be completely rescinded for the property upon recordation of the map. The Villa Holy Names site will just be used for residential, and that is a permitted use in the R120 zone. So that meant the condition that was added was number 5, And the condition that should be eliminated is number 7, the one that was originally added by the Planning Commission. And that concludes staff's report. I do have an engineering representative in attendance, and the town's environmental consultant is present if there's any questions about the environmental process or the EIR. Also, the applicant's team is present as well. And staff is available if you have any questions.
Thank you. So questions of council? Oh, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of staff. And looking at the conditions of approval, I see, I'm going to confirm that the architecture and site for the subsequently developed homes will need an architecture and site approval. But I don't recall it saying that it's going to go to the Planning Commission. So if you could clarify that for me.
It isn't specified. Typically, what would happen is when applications, they could file all of them together, or they can file them in groups. We're not sure exactly how it would occur at this point, since we don't know who's going to actually develop the property. When an application is filed, staff assesses that this property is governed by the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines because it is within the Hillside area. If a project was compliant and the house didn't exceed 5,000 square feet, it could possibly go through the Development Review Committee. A lot of that would depend on the analysis on the site, how large the home was, and how that fit in with the immediate neighborhood. It might be referred to Planning Commission as well, so that we haven't made any determination on that. A condition could be included requiring them to go to Planning Commission if that was the appropriate, according to council. So it could go to DRC or Planning Commission depending upon the specific proposal and how it aligned with the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines.
If we don't have a condition having it go to the Planning Commission, then it would be staff that would make that determination?
Correct.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
A follow-up question and a different question. Can you remind me how the houses came in on another hillside subdivision, which was Shady Lane? I know the Planning Commission saw some of those houses when they came in for custom built, and I think didn't see others. Was that how did that appear in the conditions, if you know?
We had, that particular plan development had 2 houses that were specifically required to come back to the Planning Commission. One of those lots has an approved architecture and site application, and that was reviewed by the commission. We also had another one that staff referred to the commission based on the size of the house that it wasn't specified, but because of the size of the house, staff referred that particular one to the Planning Commission as well. The other lot that was required to go to commission has not had an application filed to date. And if it comes in, that one will go to commission. We still have 5 lots remaining in that particular subdivision that haven't had architecture and site applications filed. But of the other 15 of the 19 total, so to date, all but one is gone. One of them is not acted on yet. So of the remaining ones, 2 went to Planning Commission, and the remainder were done by the DRC.
And on a different topic, at the Planning Commission, there was a lot of discussion regarding the stone house, and then at the end of the Planning Commission meeting, the commission determined that they would recommend that demolition was okay, but we're recommending also some kind of memorialization or plaque or some such, and I don't think that's in the conditions that we have in front of us. Is that for us to determine how we want to deal with that, whether we're going to allow demolition, what do we want to do if that happens?
It is up to the council to determine if they want to, if you want to agree with the commission on the demolition. And yes, they didn't specify an exact means, and so there isn't a condition on that. I did point it out in the staff report so the council would be aware. And I think the applicant is willing to do something, but we don't have a specific proposal at this time. So we didn't put a condition in.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to the issue of that conditional use permit. You indicated that in the CUP, the condition number 5 is the revised. That's in our Exhibit A of Attachment 9.
Correct.
The current. So just to clarify, the conditional use permit, as 5 indicates, the permit shall be rescinded prior to the recordation of the final map. Then you mentioned 7 as well. Now, 7, the conditional use permit for the convent and conference facility shall be amended to apply only to the continued operation of Villa Holy Names property at 82 Prospect. So the new language satisfies what the Planning Commission requested, is that?
Well, we added condition 7 based on the Planning Commission recommendation, and that was recommended by staff at the time the project was considered by the commission. And then we subsequently did a little more analysis on it and got information from the sisters that they intend to use the property only for residential purposes. So it's no longer needed, the use permit is no longer needed, and it does not need to be amended. So that's why condition 7 can be eliminated.
It can be, but we could also leave it in, is that correct? Or would it make any difference?
Well, then it would require them to come in and amend a use permit that they don't need to have any longer.
So your recommendation is with 5,
Correct.
that condition accomplishes what both 5 and 7 would, or what 7 is attempting to accomplish.
Well,
And
yeah,
then we remunerate the rest of those.
correct. 7 could go away, 5 should remain,
All right,
so that the use permit does sunset.
thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, how about disclosures from council? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I have met with the applicant maybe 3 times and visited the site on those times. And I've also visited the site of the Stone House as late as yesterday afternoon.
Vice Mayor.
I visited the site, met with the applicants and Mr. Morley, Sister Mary Pat. I'm not sure how many times. I've also spoken by telephone, and I've also spoken to interested parties in the neighborhood regarding the project.
I visited the site just today to look at the Stone House specifically. I also met with the applicants on a number of occasions. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I met with the applicant in town this past week, and over the past several years, I have met with the applicants periodically on the property and visited the property.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. I've met with the applicant several times over the last 2 years at the site. I've had phone conversations with their representatives and been at the site. Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this time, if anybody wishes to speak on this matter, please fill out one of these cards. We have 2. I'd like to call the applicant forward to make a presentation. And you have 10 minutes if you need them.
Good evening, Mayor Leonardis and council members. My name is Sister Mary Pat Leroy, a Sister of the Holy Names and Chair of the Long Range Planning Committee. I want to thank you for the opportunity to meet with you tonight to provide some background on our plans. As I shared with the Planning Commission, the Sisters have served thousands of residents of Los Gatos since our arrival in 1945 through our mission of education at St. Mary's School and the Montessori school that was on our property. Our senior sisters have responded to many requests for prayers. Our 10.3-acre campus can accommodate 140 sisters. It includes a care center, chapel, living areas, administrative offices, and conference facilities. There are more than 85,000 square feet of buildings on campus. Most of the space is in the 3-story Marion and Sienna buildings. Given the age of our sisters, the changes and rising costs of elder care delivery, and the age and condition of our 60-year-old buildings, we have been evaluating our property and options for health care and housing. Our original hope was to remain on the property and develop a plan with partners that would respond to our needs and needs of the broader Los Gatos community, similar to Los Gatos Meadows or the Terraces. The options proposed to us, however, would have been far too intense for our property. They would have increased traffic and would not have been appropriate for the character of our neighborhood. So we moved in a new direction. We have found 2 retirement communities not far from the current site to provide skilled care and assisted living for our sisters. And we made the difficult decision then to sell our home and return our property to its residential roots. Surrounding us today are single-family homes. The map that we have submitted will return our property to a compatible residential use. We've prepared a plan that is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood, is fully compliant with the Town of Los Gatos General Plan and the existing Town of Los Gatos zoning. It will result in an overall de-intensification of the use and the site. After reviewing the application and all of the technical studies for the project, the town and its environmental consultant determined that the environmental review process under CEQA could have been fulfilled by preparing an initial study, mitigated negative declaration. While such a study would have been legally adequate, we decided to complete a comprehensive EIR for the project. We assumed the added cost and the extended timeline to ensure that all potential environmental impacts were thoroughly studied and that the project was evaluated for consistency with the town's goals and policies. We are pleased with its evaluation and conclusions. As confirmed in the EIR, there are no significant unavoidable impacts as a result of the proposed project. In fact, there are very few impacts in general, and all are mitigated to less than significant levels. Our proposal conforms to the general plan designation. It also conforms to the Town of Los Gatos General Plan goals and policies as confirmed in the EIR and staff report. Our map fully complies with the Town of Los Gatos zoning for our property. We are not requesting, nor do we require, a planned development zoning. While the zoning allows for up to 21 lots on our property, our tentative map includes only 17 lots, which is lower density that wouldn't be allowed. Lot sizes are consistent with the zoning and our neighborhood as confirmed by the town staff evaluation and EIR. The map is a standard and conforming subdivision under the Subdivision Map Act. We do not request or require any exceptions or variances for the map. When we announced our transition in November of 2012, we sent letters to all of our nearby neighbors and have sent regular updates. Since our announcement, we have had 6 community meetings with our neighbors on the Hill to keep them informed of our plans, the town's process, and the environmental review process. Sister Kate, our development director, has had many conversations with neighbors and friends who were not able to attend one of these meetings. We have been quite moved by the kind words of support that we have received from so many of our friends and neighbors, and the expressions of regret that we eventually will be leaving the property. We also appreciate all those neighbors and residents of our community who have sent letters of support and the expressions and they spoke at our Planning Commission hearing. Many sisters and supporters of our project are here today. I would like to acknowledge your presence, and if you wish, I invite you to stand. Thank you. The proceeds from the sale of the Los Gatos property represent critical funds necessary for our future health care and housing, the needs of our aging members. We as Sisters of the Holy Names are solely responsible for our financial administration and planning, pooling our earned resources and using donor gifts for the common good, especially for the care of our frail members. This plan will reduce our unfunded liability. We are aware that there is a repeated call in the hearings of the Planning Commission and Town Council over the past years to comply with the general plan and zoning and to avoid exceptions and plan developments as much as possible. We listened carefully. We have followed those rules. Your professional staff recommends approval, and your Planning Commission recommended unanimously that you approve the project and certify the EIR as proposed. For all of these reasons, we respectfully request your approval of our map as proposed this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, I'd like to invite members of the public to fill out a speaker card if you want to speak on this topic. The first speaker is Susan Kenkel.
Good evening. Susan Kenkel. I live at 99 Reservoir Road. I'm kind of kitty corner from this property. As a town and as a neighborhood, we have been privileged to have had the sisters and the convent with us for many years. And as sad as we are to see them leave, we understand the necessity. We have all been blessed, no pun intended, with their care and foresight in determining the future of their beloved property. Their planning and preparation should serve as a model for future applicants who wish to use property in Los Gatos. How often do we see applications before the Planning Commission or the Town Council which do not seek any variations in codes or zoning or restrictions or maps or guidelines. This application, which will retain the character of the neighborhood, should be approved and applauded by the council. While I have your ears, I'd like to address the post-demolition and post-off-hauling period of construction, which will involve 17 homes. I'd like you to consider the enormous increase in construction-related traffic that this will entail. Reservoir Road, College Avenue, Kimball and Cleland, and Prospect Avenue are narrow, windy roads. They are good for 2 cars, one going each way. They are not good for semis and cement mixers and flatbeds and all of those machines necessary for construction. I would like to ask that the traffic engineers of the town, the police, and whoever else wants to stick their finger into this pie to institute measures for the years of construction of these 17 homes. I'd like to make sure we protect the safety and sanity of the area's neighbors. Let's make sure that the construction is done as conscientiously as the application has been. Thank you.
Ms. Kankel, we have a question from Councilmember Spector.
Good evening. In reading the Planning Commission's transcript, I read that you raised an issue, either the same issue or similar issue with the Planning Commission, and as a result, they modified the conditions of approval. Did those modifications of conditions address or go toward addressing your concerns?
Only the demolition. I know that there is one in place when the water company sold their property opposite me. There was a lot of demolition and off-hauling done, and there was a great traffic process in place that went all through the town, and I know that's in place. It just seems that with 17 homes all being done at one time, we really need some concrete guidelines. And I wouldn't want it as part of this application. It's just kind of a heads up that when these applications start coming in, or the developer is chosen, that this be made maybe a community benefit or something of that sort. I just, you all know how busy college is with walkers and riders and all of that, and you came up those roads, you know that they're narrow, so just kind of a heads up and forethought.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Mark Von Canel.
Good evening, Council. Mark Von Canel. I reside at 100 Reservoir Road, which is directly adjacent to the sisters. My wife and I were actually just walking up there this evening. I wasn't prepared to come and speak, but after running into Susie reminding me that this was on the agenda tonight, and we've had a great relationship. We actually built one of the homes at the old water reservoir shed in '06, and have raised our 2 children there and have fond memories of the sisters' property and the koi pond, and everything has been, they've been absolutely great neighbors, and we're going to miss them. With that said, I think this is the only use that this property would really make sense to go back to, which is its original intended purpose of it. The sisters have gone above and beyond all standard efforts to notify the neighbors and involve all of us in this process and keep us informed, which we've greatly appreciated. So we are totally in support in seeing this property going back to the residential use that it was intended for. Obviously, as my neighbor just mentioned, we do have some concerns when it comes to the construction. We would have some recommended conditions potentially that the homes do all go through planning, that the construction traffic flow be strongly considered. All those roads that were mentioned are very narrow. Reservoir, even though it has a big sign when you go up there that's overgrown now that states that it's not intended for trucks, trucks continue to go up that way, and on a regular basis is just going down. You can't get through. So definitely traffic control would be a large consideration. Also, traffic control, once the development gets done, it's some of the intersections there. We happen to be at Reservoir and Prospect. 2 times we've had our mailboxes ran into just from people coming around the corner. So with additional residential traffic there, it might be something to consider. That's all I have. I think it'll be a great project. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Morgan or Melissa McDonald.
Sorry, my husband is coaching a Little League meeting, so we weren't sure if he was going to make it or not. My name's Melissa McDonald. I live at 175 Prospect Avenue. We purchased the house in August. Hi, Barbara. And when we purchased the house, we fell in love with the home, we fell in love with the neighborhood, and we were very much aware of the plans for the property, and we're in full support. When the plans were released, we saw that there was positioning of one of the roads that just kind of was directly across from our driveway, and so we were a little bit concerned about that. And when the sisters found out, and Mr. Morley, they called us in for a meeting and wanted to hear our issues and our problems, and wanted to work it out. And we're so gracious to have that street moved over. And so we do not have any issues, and just want to make sure that it's noted that we are in full support of the plans for the property. And that's all.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next speaker is Lee Quintana.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. As I've stated before, I'm in support of this project, and I appreciate the process that the sisters have done with the neighborhood, reaching out for input prior to submitting their project. I just have one question regarding whether whether shared driveways are possible on the lots that come off the cul-de-sac, particularly lots 14 through 17. I've asked this question twice now, once in a letter to the Planning Commission and again tonight in a letter to the Town Council. And I would like to know if that is a possibility and what the process would be. This is a good project. I believe that shared driveways off of the cul-de-sac, again, particularly lots 14 through 17, would make it even a better project in that it would likely decrease grading, decrease the number of trees to be removed, and make the driveways off of the cul-de-sac that have relatively short street frontages less dominant from the street. So I would ask if it would be possible to get clarification on that act. Again, I'm in support of the project.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, I would like to invite the applicant to come forward. If you would like, you have 5 more minutes to respond to anything raised.
I think we had a technical issue there. I thank those who spoke and thank Lee for her question. And so maybe, Eric, you might talk about the design or on the shared driveways.
Great. Thank you, Sister Mary Pat. Eric Morley, 405 Alberta Way, Suite 3, Los Gatos. Yeah, just wanted to address the question about shared drives. The plan has been designed very meticulously to minimize grading, protect trees, and also create a hillside cul-de-sac, not a what I would consider a more 50s style. I described to the Planning Commission more of a Blossom Hill Manor type cul-de-sac, and it's a neighborhood in which I live, and I think that's very appropriate there, but for this hillside location, not. And in terms of shared drives, that's really something that can be addressed and should be addressed at the architecture and site level, if at all. You have a number of policies in your guidelines and ordinances that actually discourage shared drives. But the home footprints that are there today are conceptual in nature. When those architecture and site applications come in, that would really be the appropriate time to identify whether that even makes sense. But to predetermine at this stage that they shall be required or need to be required, I think it's really premature, and there's an opportunity to look at that when you have site-specific applications before you. Thank you. Oh, and last, I was speaking with Susie, with Mrs. Kenkel, and we talked a little bit about the future construction, and I might recommend that either a condition be added or kind of direction to staff that as those architecture and site applications come in, special attention be paid to construction logistics. There's a model that was put in place for the reservoir project. That model's been replicated here, and would recommend that many of those measures be included in future architecture and site applications. I would also close by saying each application will come in, and I think the sisters would prefer that they not be prejudged to go through a particular process, that they go through the normal process. If it does require notification to the neighborhood, one of the requirements that the sisters will have and criteria for selecting a buyer is that they work very closely and have a demonstrated ability to work closely with neighbors in Los Gatos or similar communities. But I know that the sisters would prefer not to prejudge a process that's in terms of they're automatically going to the commission or elsewhere, but let those, if possible, let those go through the normal process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. I just have a quick question for you, mostly for curiosity, and maybe some members of the audience also would wonder. What would be your time estimation when the final map is recorded with all the APN numbers and such?
Yeah, so that much of that is really driven by the town process and review process. The sisters will begin a selection process following approval. That will take obviously many months. Whomever that buyer is will need to begin their improvement drawings, their final map. That typically takes several months. So, you're looking at probably early 2015, late 2014 best. But staff could give you a better sense of when that comes in. But you're looking at 6 to 9 months for that process to go through.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if this question is appropriate for Mr. Morley or Sister Mary Pat, but you can decide. One of the portions of the Planning Commission's motion was that they defer to the council and suggest that the council consider memorialization of the site, including the stone house, as appropriate. So that's a decision we have to make. Do you or Sister have any recommendations?
Yes, first, let me just address the stone house for a moment and then talk about some commemorative, something to commemorate the sisters being there or the stone house. I think the record is very clear on the numerous, both structural and siting issues as to why the stone house is requested and needs to be demolished. That being said, we did indicate to the Planning Commission, and the sisters agreed that the utilization of stone from the stone house be retained, be stockpiled, be used on site in some way. And that also, from a commemorative perspective, Sister Mary Pat shared with the Planning Commission that the sisters have done great work in this community over nearly 70 years, but they've also done that in a very understated and humble way. And so to the degree that there was either a street naming or a plaque or something like that was modest in nature, that I think that's something that the sisters would be open to and can work with an ultimate buyer in the town as to where that's located and what that looks like.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll officially close the public hearing and look to council for discussion or a motion on this. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. A question of staff on this issue of construction issues and controls. Because we don't know if the individual homes will be developed all at once or in groups or individually. And Shady Lane was referenced, which I think was approved in like 2003, if I remember right, somewhere along in there. And so it still has lots. What are our options for either having some wording in a condition or providing direction to staff that would say, no matter how this progresses, that we need to have very carefully thought out construction mitigation plans in place?
Well, there are already a number of conditions to address construction impacts. Condition number 70 addresses construction traffic. Number 71 requires a traffic control plan. Number 73, a construction management plan. There was also a pretty detailed demolition plan. The next step in the process following approval of the vesting tentative map is that an architecture and site application is required for the demolition. So that will be looked at again in more detail. Whoever purchases the property, we believe the demolition will all occur at one time, that won't be a piecemeal type of operation. It is expected that the demolition will take about 40 days to complete. So it will be something that will go on for a period of time, but there will be a whole bunch of measures put into place. As Mr. Morley mentioned, we had a plan when the reservoir was filled, and it was the reverse there. Things were coming in, filled material was coming in versus material being demoed and removed. But trucks were, pretty well managed, work around school hours. We have usually flagmen out there. We'll post signs in advance. There's a whole series of things that will be put into place to alert people and to, make sure that everything goes smoothly. So I think we have enough conditions to address the comments you heard this evening. And we will be, again, looking at the demolition plan in further detail when they come back for the architecture and site approval before that.
So, not to put words in your mouth, but to summarize what I think you said, or what I thought I heard, is that between the existing conditions, the commitment on the part of the sisters to make that part of the RFP that they talked about in selecting the builder, the additional processes that come along, ANS and so on, and the vigilance of the neighbors, that we're covered and we don't need to worry about additional condition. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Given the request by the Planning Commission that the council make any determinations regarding the stone or retaining the stone or using it, and given the testimony that we've heard, does staff have any suggestions as to what the council should put into any conditions, and at what point?
I hate to tell the applicant what they have to install. It would be appropriate to have a condition, but I'm not quite sure how to, that they have some sort of memorialization, but I wouldn't want to specify what that is. It could be we develop something with the applicant and we could bring that back to the council as an informal item for input, or...
Mr. Mayor, if I can follow up.
We could deal with it with the demolition plan, too. That's another possibility.
Would it be sufficiently specific yet sufficiently vague if we had a condition that said the stone shall be retained and used on site?
They've indicated a willingness to do that, and we're just not sure what manner. Maybe it'd be low garden walls or something like that, but maybe we could create some sort of monument or plaque or something. As
well, I don't know if the council or the applicant wants to go that far,
right.
But Mr. Larson?
That could certainly be an appropriate condition to add, and I think staff would look, when the demolition permit comes in, how they plan to fulfill that requirement at that time.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember McNutt.
I'm ready to go ahead and make a motion. And I love it when there are no exceptions, when everything follows the rules, and all the community outreach has been done. Makes it very straightforward, and even though it's a very major change for our community and a big project, it makes it easy to make the motion. So I will move to certify the environmental impact report Exhibits 1 and 2 of Attachment 1, adopt the mitigation monitoring and report plan in Attachment 7, make the required findings in Attachment 8, adopt a resolution to approve subdivision applications M13003 in Attachment 9, subject to conditions in Exhibit A of Attachment 9 with two changes. One is to eliminate current condition number 7, which relates to the conditional use permit, and to add a condition that has the wording suggested by Councilmember Spector, that the historic stones shall be retained and reused on site. And the motion also includes the development plans in Exhibit B, Exhibit 9 of Attachment 1.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I will weigh in briefly. I went up to the site today just to review the stone house, and I realized that it's an old property, and unfortunately, it doesn't appear that it could be saved for any practical use. But around the property itself, there is a treasure trove of stones, river rocks that were pulled right out of the Los Gatos Creek, and you see them all over town. So I look forward to a lot of that stone being used in the new development. I think it would add a great benefit and continue the ambience of the area up on the hill there, which is very special. It's going to be a very special place for people to live. And I hope moving forward that whoever ends up with this property will see the value in that. So I will be supporting the motion. And I guess I'll call, Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two comments reflecting what Ms. Kenkel said. First, I know that we've said it, but we want to make very, very clear that as we go forward, the whole traffic mitigation, construction mitigation program be clearly monitored and evaluated, and that the neighbors be able to participate in the ongoing evaluations, so that everything that we're saying here tonight has as little impact on the neighborhood as possible, given the fact that we know these are narrow roads and steep roads and much trafficked roads, and so make sure that we emphasize that as we move forward. The second thing I wanted to reflect on Ms. Kenkel's comment was that she indicated that the planning and preparation, I think I'm kind of quoting here, the planning and preparation should serve as a model for Los Gatos development. And I think that it goes without question that this has probably been the most comprehensive and extensive planning from beginning to end that I've seen in 16 years on council. And I commend the sisters, I commend all those who have been participants, I commend the developers who have assisted in this process. But as a model, to be focused on for future reference, I think we are very fortunate to have this in front of us, and I look forward to the project starting, being completed, and the hillside being an extraordinary residential venue for our community. So with that, I'm going to be supporting the motion.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously.
You guys didn't even need me and my wife. Congratulations. I got a little week.
We still have two more items. I don't want to get struck by lightning. So I'm going to call the meeting back to order here. We have two other items on the agenda this evening. The next is conditional use permit U-13-023, project location 346 North Santa Cruz Avenue. And this is requesting an approval to operate a tasting room on a property zoned C2, APN 529-04-043. I'd like to defer to Ms. Jennifer Savage for the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. The tasting room proposed tonight includes retail sales. There would be no seats within the establishment, but there would be a stand-up counter. The use would be open no later than 8 p.m. and on some evenings would close earlier. The project was reviewed by the Planning Commission, who recommended approval with modifications of one condition regarding the use, that no beer or liquor retail sales be permitted. And then they also brought up some other issues as well. One being the Alcoholic Beverage Control Department's regulations regarding the number and size of pours. ABC does not regulate the number or size of pours under this type 02 license, but there is a condition within your staff report that you can consider that would specifically limit the number of pours, and the applicant may be amenable to that. There is a desk item before you tonight. It does discuss the draft policy for a revised alcoholic beverage policy, but it is not for discussion this evening. This concludes staff presentation, and staff is available for any questions.
Questions of staff. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. One question, this is just a minor point, but on the draft conditions, on the introductory line, should it say wine tasting room? And right now it just says tasting room, which we are assuming refers to wine, but should it not say wine tasting to be very specific?
We could include that.
Okay. And then a more interesting question. I read the transcript from the Planning Commission, and I don't think you were at that meeting, but maybe through other conversation you could give me some guidance on this. I'm not sure I understand the concern about why they want to limit the tastings to just 2 wineries, and actually had a condition added to that. So can you give me any more explanation as to what the thought process was behind that?
The applicant may be able to confirm this, but my understanding is that the type of the ABC license that they would be receiving actually does limit the number of wineries that are allotted at that space under that license. So it may have been from that they discerned that it should be specified in the condition that it be limited to 2.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, I'd like to invite the applicant forward to do your presentation. Oh, before we begin, does anyone on council have disclosures they would like to share? I'll just briefly mention I went by the property today and just checked out the outside of the building. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, council, for seeing our application this evening. My name is Matt Odinger. I'm with Fernwood Cellars. And the application is to open up a tasting room on North Santa Cruz at the property. Basically, the concept behind the entire business is to go ahead and pour flights of wine, make it, although it does involve alcohol, it really is a retail outlet where the focus is selling bottles of wine for off-site consumption. We also would be selling pre-packaged, pre-prepared foods, which would be able to be consumed on site if somebody was so inclined. Again, there is no seating on site, so it's not a meal per se, as it would be more of along with the wine that they were having. The other concept behind the business is more of an educational style. I have been in this business and for going on almost 20 years now, after leaving Los Gatos, and having been born and raised here for 18 years. And we only make wine from grapes that we grow. So we control the entire process from pruning to pouring it in your glass. So there's a lot of educational aspect to the business itself. We take great pride in the product that we produce. We've had a lot of accolades in regards to the product that we produce, and we are looking to further expose our product in more of a mainstream fashion than at the winery itself, which is relatively remote in the Santa Cruz Mountains. We do farm and harvest fruit as far north as Los Altos, Saratoga, Cupertino, Los Gatos, Montserino, and further down as well as on the other side of the hill. So it is a backyard industry, if you will. So if you have any questions, I'm here for clarification or anything of that nature.
Are there any questions for the speaker? I see Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I notice in the Planning Commission's conditions of approval, they have one that states, I think it's, Condition 8, that if there's a change in the alcohol and beverage policy after this, should you get approved after your approval, that you will have 6 months to comply.
Yes.
That could be a change. How do you feel about that? I mean, is that agreeable to you?
Well, you're sort of asking to agree to something you have no idea what that means.
That's what I'm asking.
That's a very broad statement downstream. Quite frankly, I don't know that we have much choice in the matter if we want to be considered to have our application accepted. I guess from a fundamental level, I would assume, and maybe it's a bad assumption, that any alcohol policy changes that the town makes would be more directed towards hard liquor, hours of operation, and that sort of thing, as those seem to be aspects that are more detrimental to the quality of life within the town. If I had my preference, I would like to not have that condition included with our project. But again, I don't know that as applicant I have any choice in the matter.
All right, thank you. That's a very candid answer.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. So let me ask you the question I asked staff about the limitation to wineries. In fact, is that a requirement from alcohol beverage control, and why?
Yes, it is. And it may shock some of the council members to hear that the alcohol beverage control, and in fact all of our federal regulations in regards to alcohol are relatively old and archaic, many of them actually coming post-prohibition. The type of license that we possess, a type 02 wine grower license, meaning we produce the product ourselves. We are only licensed to sell the product that we produce, not purchase beer or wine from other producers and sell them within our facilities. So as a result of that 02 license, in fact, having two independent wineries within the same room is their limitation. And they want us to have a line on the floor, etc. So it's in behind the bar to keep that wine on that side and this wine on that side. So it's
interesting business.
Huh? Yeah. So it is their regulations that are putting that limit to it.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Just a follow-up to that question, since we're learning from this process ourselves in some regard. Does that mean if you go to sell the business someday, you would have to sell your whole winemaking operation along with the retail operation, if somebody wanted to
Fernwood
take that over?
you're speaking of the corporation versus just the tasting room?
If for some reason that you decided to let the operation of the tasting room go,
Mm-hmm.
and you still wanted to operate your winery,
Yes.
how would that work?
So with our license, basically what we are allowed to have with a type 02 license, you're allowed to have two tasting rooms, an on-premises tasting room and what they call a satellite tasting room. This proposal is for our satellite tasting room. If for some reason we ultimately decided to close down the tasting room, we simply would close the satellite aspect of our tasting business, and we would still have our on-site tasting room, and at that point would actually have the ability to relocate our satellite tasting room somewhere else pending approval in whatever area that was.
Just one more follow-up question. In that case, would it, I guess, be possible for another winery to move into that space and do what you're doing, but they would have to essentially do what you're doing, produce and sell only their own wine? Or could another winery come in, or another vendor come in and just sell wine from?
I think that would ultimately be the decision of the planning commission and the town council as far as what is permitted to go into the space. From an ABC point of view, my understanding is that they have no problem with another winery coming in with a taste room in that place. Page 1 on their application is to go down to the local town and have them sign off that you have permission to have an establishment there. So again, it would come back to the town council and the planning commission.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for the speaker? Seeing none, I'd like to invite members of the public who filled out a speaker card to come speak. And if you haven't and you'd like to speak, please fill out a card. The first speaker is Ed Burke.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for the opportunity to support Fernwood Sellers and Matt Odinger and his family. I've known Matt Odinger almost his whole life. He went to the Montessori school that the sisters ran. He went to Los Gatos High School. He coached Los Gatos football there as an assistant coach, and he's been a young man that I've spent hours on the ski hill with too. So I'm well aware of him and his family. I don't know if you realize that the facility he wants to operate from is family property. I am a wine grower. Matt has been, I would say, one of the most outstanding graduates of the University of California at Davis Enology Schools, and he's somewhat modest about that, but does win great prizes for his wines. And he does, in fact, do backyard winemaking. He does farm small areas, 400 plants, 600 plants, whatever, in our community. He's our mentor. So I think that I would love to see this as his tasting room, all right, but also the 20 or so small growers like me that sometimes he does take our grapes to make his wine, we could meet there and learn all the more there. So it's not just an off-sale Fernwood Cellars, a tasting room. To me, it's an addition to the community. So I applaud him, and I really hope that you approve his application.
Thank you. Actually, you were the one and only speaker card I have. Oh, here comes another one.
Hi, Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. Council members, I've been up before you talking about alcohol and intensification downtown. But I do want to say that I walked the site yesterday, and I think this would be a really appropriate application downtown. It's in a location on the north part of Santa Cruz Avenue that was a personal service, and it's in front of another personal services location. I think we have so many hair salons and nail salons, I don't think we're going to miss losing that location. We used to have Fleming's Jenkins right over by Athletic Performance on Main Street, so we did have a tasting room that's closed and turned into an antique store. And so I feel like it wouldn't be an intensification, it would just be a relocation of a use that we've had downtown. And I think this isn't a bar, it's something that fits in with downtown. And I think it's a reasonable thing to have down there. So as a downtown resident, I support this.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Seeing none, Mr. Oettinger, if you'd like to come forward and add anything, you have 5 more minutes to speak.
I don't know that there's that much more I can add to what you've already heard or read before you. I would like to thank the folks who came and spoke in support of the project, particularly Ed Burke, who forgot to mention that at one point he was my employer for quite a few years through high school too, so I appreciate all of his mentorship as well. So I really do appreciate, Mr. Mayor and council members, your consideration for this proposal, and hopefully it goes through. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. So officially close the public hearing and look to council for discussion or motion. Councilmember Spector.
If I might, questions of staff, Mr. Mayor. One of the speakers mentioned Fleming Jenkins, and so has that site now lost its CUP for wine tasting?
Yes.
And then the other one is the, I can't remember what it was called, the French winery. Does that still have its CUP?
It's been closed for over a year, so yes, it has lost its CUP.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Further questions, discussion? Councilmember Brzezinski?
Thank you. Question for staff. On page 4 of the staff report, you have the recommended additional language to the CUP. And that's the question of PORs, and it also includes the ABC regulations. Is it the intention of staff in providing us this language that that entire paragraph be included in the conditions of approval?
Only if the council determines it to be fit.
I assume that. Okay. But I was just wondering if both phrases relative to the ABC language was the intent that should go in that condition, or can we stop after 5 ounces per customer per day? What's the recommendation?
You could choose either.
Okay. I'm ready to make a motion. Okay. And the motion will, of course, allow us to continue discussion. But I would like to make the required findings, rather. That's attachment 1, and approve the conditional use permit U13023 with the modifications as recommended by the Planning Commission. Okay. And adopt the resolution of approval and recommended conditions for the conditional use permit to operate a tasting room in property zone C2. That would be attachment 2, but inclusive of the language that the staff has recommended under the number and size of tastings as indicated on page 4. And that's the recommendation.
We have a motion. Vice Mayor.
I'll second the motion, and I appreciate the questions regarding the other 2 tasting rooms that no longer have a CUP. So I'm comfortable that there's not an intensification, and it's unusual to convert personal service to something other than personal service. So I think that's welcome, and that part of town was also mentioned at Planning Commission, and I think it'll be an appropriate use for that location. So I'll support the motion and second it.
Councilmember Spector.
At this point, I don't want to, I don't know how I'm going to vote, so I'm going to put that issue aside. It has always been a concern of mine when we approve alcoholic uses, because we have an alcohol and beverage policy, which we have been in the process of amending and finalizing. That has drawn on, admittedly, and it is supposed to come back to us in April. And the reason that's been of concern to me is because when we consider these conditional use permits, we tag on a condition that should we change the alcohol and beverage policy, then the person with the CUP has to comply with that alcohol and beverage policy within 6 months. And as the speaker pointed out, he is agreeing to something that he doesn't know what it's going to be. And I find that bad planning. I find it, and not on the part of the applicant, but on the part of the town. I don't think that is a good idea. The applicant and other folks might think that it'll be a benign change. But if one looks at the issues that we will be considering in the alcohol and beverage policy, it includes issues like the location, concentration of uses, the amount of parking that is required, whether that parking is going to be ultimately determined by the seats or the occupancy potential. And the reason I mention parking and concentration of uses, because these are not something that an established business, a business that has moved in, can just pick up and change. So they're going to be given 6 months to do a change that they may or may not be able to do, to handle, to actually be able to do. And so I am very concerned about the process that we're going through now of hanging a 6-month condition on the approval, given the fact that neither we nor the applicant knows what that's going to be. And I just wanted to share that, that given the fact that I don't know how I'm going to vote, but as with the vice mayor, the fact that we have lost 2 CUPs in town for wine tasting makes me more inclined to vote for this application. But I just wanted to share a concern for the town and for the applicant.
Further comments? Oh, Jennifer Savage.
I just want to clarify, after further consultation, the French seller may have their CUP intact for a few more months.
Thank you. So I will weigh in on the issue, and I have a question for staff about the hours of operation. If the applicant wanted to increase those later, would he have to come in for a new hearing or CUP modification?
A conditional use permit modification, yes.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion among council. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Spector brings up a good point, and it seems like there's 2 ways to address this. One is we could amend the motion and eliminate condition number 8 that references compliance within 6 months of any new policy, or since it looks like we really are going to be dealing with it this spring, we can just keep this as an example in the backs of our minds that whatever we decide to do will have impact on all of our businesses, and especially those that have been more recently approved, and perhaps be more sensitive to that in whatever we determine for that policy. So I just threw out those 2 options as a way to address her issues.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow on that comment, the applicant's taking the chance. We're looking at a policy that we have had under advisement for a good long period of time. I feel comfortable with the application as it's being defined, and frankly, at this point, I think that the issues we're going to tackle when we do the alcohol entertainment policy will relate to businesses that are different than this. They will have to conform to whatever we established at that point in time, but I think we're going to be looking in that policy for those concerns we have in town that have proven themselves to be either detrimental to the well-being of the neighborhood, or that have created issues relative to law enforcement intervention, those kinds of things. I don't think that we're necessarily going to be looking to constrain all uses to such an extent that this application is going to be called into question in a significant way. I don't want to foreclose on whatever outcome we're going to have, but my assumption is that we have had very good experiences both with the French cellar and with Fleming Jenkins, and the wine tasting opportunity, particularly focusing on Santa Cruz Mountain wineries, is to me it's a very significant benefit to the brand of our community and our ability to reinforce those Santa Cruz Mountain wineries that are very much in need of attention, and we can be a platform for that attention. And so I am fully cognizant of the fact that that particular item is there. It's a risk. We're going to deal with this issue perhaps late April, but I do think that we're probably going to be fairly comfortable with the outcome. So that's why I feel comfortable with the motion that I made.
Further discussion? I'll weigh in a little bit on this. Just reviewing this being an owner-occupied business, the hours of operation are very limited compared to some other entities. It's 654 square feet. There are no chairs. Of course, they're governed by the ABC laws. I see this as there's no such thing as no risk, but a very low risk endeavor moving forward. So I'm comfortable supporting the motion with respect to what the other council members have discussed this evening. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Moving on to our next public hearing. It's the comprehensive fee schedule for fiscal year 2014-15 with amendments to the traffic and construction activity mitigation fees. We have several staff members who will be speaking on this. Mr. Larson?
Yes. Your presentation tonight will consist of two parts. First, we'll discuss the traffic and construction impact mitigation fees, and we would seek council direction at the end of that, because at the end of that discussion, it will then flow into your following action, which is the comprehensive fee and fine schedule for adoption as Part B. In presenting the first item will be Director of Parks and Public Works, Matt Morley.
Thank you.
Good evening. You have a desk item with two communications from the public in your packet tonight. And I think we have a paper presentation for you with the technical difficulties on the overhead projector. So we'll go through the paper presentation. So I'll call out the slide numbers along the way. Hopefully that'll help you follow along. So I'll start with slide 2, which is right after the cover slide. The first item we're talking about is a construction activity impact fee. This is the more straightforward of the two fees and offsets the cost of road maintenance caused by construction traffic, so damage by heavy vehicles. It was adjusted in 2010 to the current rate of $1 per square foot, and our recommendation is to increase that to $1.12 per square foot, which aligns with the construction cost increases that we've seen over time. Moving along to slide number 3, moving into the traffic impact mitigation fee, a little bit more complex fee, so I'll spend some more time discussing this one. For this fee, it is important to note that the average daily trips that this fee is based on is growth-related, as are the capital projects that are included in the calculation, and a nexus between the fee and the project must exist. This fee captures the allocated cost of cumulative traffic impacts town-wide from new development, and the current rate is set at $600 per trip, with a discount for additional trips at $60 or $120 depending on the use. A couple of observations on this fee structure. The previously adopted methodology provides a discount to larger non-residential developments, so you could argue that this serves to encourage these larger developments. Uncollected impact fees are a policy decision, and ultimately the cost of these projects will fall to other sources, including the GFAR. And there may be an argument that increases the tax base to help offset the cost of lower fee collections, although through a different method. So in a sense, the past policy direction has been to encourage the development through discounted fees. And I should note that this is a very narrow look at our fee structure, so other developer costs could factor into the discussion, including things like community benefit. And moving on to slide number 4. Leading up to this report, we conducted an update of a 2010 consultant study. In updating the study, we reviewed job and population growth assumptions, updated the list and cost of transportation projects required to accommodate the general plan build-out, adjusted calculations to reflect current traffic impact mitigation fund balances, and developed options for fee adjustments. So the next slide summarizes where we landed with that. This effort led to a cost of an $854 per trip fee as opposed to the $600 previously adopted. This means that for every additional trip generated in development would be responsible for the $854. As we detailed in the report, this could lead to significant cost increases for developments. So staff has prepared some options for adjusting of this fee, and I'll run through those next. So it looks like we're up on the screen. So going to slide number 6, which is option number 1, exactly. This option maintains the current structure, but increases the fee to $854. This change in itself is a 42% increase, and it does retain the discount for trips over 10 as previously directed. This is the lowest cost impact of the options that we're putting forward tonight and aligns with prior council direction. Option 2 is a flat rate look, which eliminates the discount provisions completely. All trips would be charged the flat rate of $854, and this results in significant increases for most uses with the exception of single-family housing and some of the smaller developments. Option 3 is a progressive fee. This charges full cost for the first 10 trips, as with the past policy, and then moves to a discount structure. The discount is increases progressively as the trips increase. And the impact on very large developments in this case is similar to that on the flat rate option. Small developments would be impacted the least. Going quickly through a couple of comparisons of what would happen with these 3 options compared with the current fee. Single-family residential on the screen before you, and you can see the increase there. This is a new sit-down restaurant, and you can see what the numbers do on that particular item. Daycare was a significant conversation point in the 2010 discussion, so we put that one on so you could see what happened there. And note that daycare is a trip-intensive activity, so the fees are fairly high. Another project that compares with something we've seen recently is an Albright development similar to Albright, which leaves you with the increases you see here. Note that the fees are applied at the time the building permits are issued. So the first phase of the Albright will not likely be affected in this case. And finally, a mixed-use development that we might see in the future. Traffic impact fees are not universal. Some jurisdictions have them and some do not. This chart provides an example of some jurisdictions that also have an impact fee. Staff recommends ultimately a holistic look at the fee schedule as opposed to a look at only the traffic impact fees. So at Council's direction, we suggest we return at some point in the future with a look at the overall development fee structure and how it compares with other jurisdictions. So that finally takes us to our recommendation. Our recommendation is based on the past applied fee schedule, retaining what in the presentation is option 1, market rate adjustment to traffic fee with no change to the methodology. We suggest we consider further changes in conjunction with a more comprehensive review in the future and adjust the construction impact fees by 11.52%, which brings that to $1.12.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may comment based on some of the public comment, we have given you 3 options and given the council has twice considered changes to the structure of the traffic impact mitigation fee and did not make changes. Option 1 that is before you simply assumes the discounting for 10 trips and greater. However, staff has proactively provided you options 2 and 3 should the council wish to provide a different direction for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Are there any questions of staff? Vice Mayor.
I have several questions, if I may.
Yes.
The first question would be directly, I guess, in response to Mr. Larson, your comment. The council direction you're referring to is that the fact that this was considered in 2010 and not changed, and therefore you're not recommending a change tonight?
No, we are actually recommending changes tonight. We're recommending rate increases, as well as we've presented the council at your request options for further changes.
I should be more specific. You're not recommending a change in the methodology, nor are you recommending a change in the current discount structure.
All 3 options we've presented to you, staff would recommend for your consideration.
Okay. I see I'm not going to get anywhere on that. Why do we give credit for existing trips? And this is for Mr. Morley or Mr. Larson, it's in our staff report on page 2 that we consider how we do the methodology for the traffic impact, and it is number of trips and square footage generated by the new square footage and the use with credit for past trips. So a credit for a past trip could be an unused property, essentially, or a property that has not been used in a way that it's getting credit for. So I'll use, for example, Bluebird Lane went into basically what was going to be an unused convalescent hospital, or Laurel Mews went into what was no longer being used as a car dealership, or the proposed condominiums on Union are going into a lot that's been vacant, yet we're giving them credit as though something had happened. Is that a town policy, or is that something in the ITE?
It's standard processes as you're developing the fees. The concept being, I think, that at one point that property did pay into the mitigation fee at whatever level that was set at when the property did so, and so you wouldn't want to double count those contributions.
Is that something we could reconsider as a town, or is that if we decide to use the ITE, are we stuck with that?
So the connection is to growth. So the traffic impact mitigation fee is a way to address growth associated with general plan changes and capital projects that are coming forward to alleviate that growth. So to the extent that the fee is in place, it needs to align with that growth element.
Okay. You sort of mentioned in your presentation the argument, if you will, you sort of posited a couple of arguments for why it may make sense to discount for larger projects. And I'm not a traffic engineer, so to me it makes no sense why a project with greater impact would pay less fees. So could you give me a more detailed analysis of why we would want to do that?
I think the point of that point was to make sure that we understood that the discounts were put in place at some point for a reason, and that ultimately it's council's discretion on whether there's discounts or not. From a public works director's perspective and somebody who's maintaining and improving our infrastructure, I'd certainly appreciate an extra increase in the fees so that we can get more of the work that we need to do get completed. But certainly that's council's discretion, and I wanted to make sure that we're acknowledging that there's competing reasons across the board for these fees and the discounts.
Okay, I appreciate your answers. So in one part of our staff report, it indicates that the discount that we're doing results in us not actually making back the money and have to look for it in other sources. So if we were to adopt a different option, we could actually pay for the impacts, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. I think that's all my questions for now. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I may be asking the same thing, but if I am, it's only because I didn't understand the answer. The issue of when determining what the traffic impact fees will be, impact is determined by a use that might not be active. For example, the traffic impact fees of Old Town might have been based on when the center was empty, based upon when it is very active. So explain to me again why we don't use the traffic at the time of the event, at the time of when you're doing the measurement.
So we are using the traffic at the time. Let me back up. So the use is an industry standard set by the ITE. So if it's a coffee shop or a retail restaurant or any of the number of the examples we provided, the usage is set. There's not a variance in the use, whether the space is empty or occupied. So if it's an empty coffee shop versus an occupied coffee shop, the usage numbers are going to be the same. Now, the reality is obviously that there's less traffic, but the calculation is done based on the potential traffic and the use that's assigned to that particular space. Now, when you get to a change in use, then you take the standard is that you're looking at the increase in use and thus the impact that change in use creates on the traffic, and that's the nexus that they're looking for this particular fee.
Okay. And then, as I read the staff report, there was a recommendation for option one on page 4, and I think you may have answered this question, but I just didn't understand. Why is that option 1 the recommendation?
Option 1 maintains the same methodology that we have in place currently. because we didn't have a direction on wanting to undertake a different methodology, and the methodology has been solidly in place, we carried that methodology forward as our current recommendation and updated it for the cost increases that we've seen in capital projects since the time this was brought back before you last.
Thank you.
Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. So just kind of doing some general understanding of this. A development project comes in, they actually could, tell me if this is a true statement, they'd actually might be paying 3 sets of fees related to traffic. So they would have, there might be traffic mitigation that they're going to pay for as part of their approval. They have to put a light in or widen a street or something like that, specific to that project. And then the construction impact, and then the third is this general traffic mitigation that's kind of townwide. Is that, do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the first item you referred to is project-specific impacts, the impacts that the project has to the area directly adjacent to the project. That's attributable only to the project. The mitigation fee would be what the growth attributes to other areas, sort of further distance potentially from the project. So. For instance, the Albright effect on Winchester Lark intersection is an example of where there would be a mitigation fee that would apply.
So that combination of 3 sets of fees could get at the problem of there's actually an increase because it's been underutilized, and so the fees they're paying that's project specific would kind of address that, and then these fees are kind of the general townwide.
Correct.
Okay. And then do we have to be concerned, as we are with our other fees, of not making a profit? And is that why your emphasis, is that why the emphasis on the nexus with growth? We can't just.
Yeah, it's important that the fees be appropriate with the need and the growth. So that's the impact fee, the whole structure behind an impact fee, and why they're legal and why they're applied.
Okay, now the more difficult question, at least for me. So I'm not understanding option 3. And option 3 is interesting to me when I look at the bar charts, because I get alarmed when I see such a huge increase for a relatively small business like a restaurant or daycare. Those are really big fees for those kinds of businesses to take on. On the other hand, option 1 doesn't seem like it's enough of a jump. So just from looking at the bars, I'm liking option 3, but I'm not understanding the description of how option 3, I didn't understand in the staff report, and I'm not understanding it. So can you take it through in a very simple way?
Sure. So if I direct your attention to page 4 of the staff report, the table 3 on the bottom of that page gives a sort of a brief outline of what the option 3 structure looks like. And so, sort of quickly, the trips 0 through 10 retain 100% of the cost per trip value, so $854 a trip at that level. And that's consistent with where we're at now and covers sort of the base development. And so we made the assumption here that there was a base number of 10 that was a good number to carry forward. Then as you move into what we call a small development, the 11 to 50 trips, we jump into the discount, which is similar to where we're at now with the discount. This discount was set at a 25% level, 25% of the 854, so a total of $214 per trip for trips 11 through 50. So if there's a project that falls into that category, 11 through 50, it would pay the $214 fee. And then as we increase in size, the fees increase proportionately. Does that help?
It does. It does. And then is there a reason why option 3 was not the one of the 3 options that you're recommending, the one that got its own chart up here on the slideshow? I mean, why is number 1 option the one that you are recommending more than the other 2 options? Why not option 3?
Let me try to explain again, because I feel I didn't answer that question satisfactorily for the council earlier. It was simply past council direction. Option 1 simply reflects what the council adopted in '94 and did not modify in 2010. So staff is simply carrying that forward as the status quo. We've tried to give you two options, one which maximizes funding based on the fee analysis per state law for future infrastructure improvements. That's option 2. And option 3 is an effort by Parks and Public Works staff and their consultant to reflect and respond to comments raised by the council in 2010. That was the genesis of the three options.
Okay, and is there any hidden downside in option 3 that you have not stated up to this point?
No, the numbers are straightforward. I think on option 3, it's a little bit more complex as it's the progressive, so the fees change as the development increases in size. So that's a little bit more complex of a structure. But other than that, I think we've outlined sort of what the pros and the cons are for you to consider.
Thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Sticking with Table 3, how were the percentages under that column determined? I know that I see the trips. I know how you do the math to get the $854 and do the multiplication. But how was it determined that 11 through 50 trips do 25, et cetera?
As we were working through this as a staff, that was a spread of increases that looked like they worked well for us, and as we ran through various iterations, that one lined out for us to make the most sense. Certainly those numbers are adjustable at council's discretion.
Can you give me an example of why they make more sense to you?
So, they achieve a balance. So they focus on a discount to the smaller businesses, which is I think something that we heard in the 2010 meeting, the focus on small business and making sure that we weren't excluding those businesses in the community. And then they still increased at a significant enough rate that they addressed the larger developments and were able to recover more of a full cost recovery at that level.
Are you able to give me an example so I can sort of put my arms around it of a development that would be an 11 to 50?
I don't think I have one. I don't have one off the top of my head, no, unfortunately.
Okay,
sorry.
thank you.
What we did try to give you on the chart on page 3 of the presentation is how the three options would manifest themselves in tangible projects. So single-family residential is not affected, whichever one of the three options you chose. The new sit-down restaurant is benefited to them, costed to the town with option 1 or 3, in that some portion of their increased trips the town would have to cover through other means, as we do currently, while under option 2 there wouldn't be any of that coverage. However, under option 3 there's less coverage. Their fee would rise from 15 to 68. Daycare similarly. However, when you then get to the large developments like Albright and the mixed-use residential, the fee difference is proportionately much less. That, we thought option 3 was in the scale set up by staff, roughly reflected some of the comments in 2010. My concern was not having a fee structure that becomes too complex to administer, and I thought this 5-tier structure was about the most we could handle, if the council wanted to go that way at all.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
Following up on the examples for option 3, and maybe Ms. Bailey can tell you historically, or Mr. Paulson, just trying to figure out, if we looked at the recent history of developments, what might there be that's 11 to 50? So if I think about Bluebird Lane, or I think about Laurel Mews, or I think about Albright, or I think about other developments that have come through the town, am I looking at, is there such a thing as 11 to 50 that's not a restaurant? And I'm also wondering about the, what I'm going to call the discount that they get for the past use that's no longer being used. So does 100 trips suddenly become 50? And so the Bluebird Lane, for lack of a better example, now gets the 25% discount when it's causing 100% impact.
So I can answer the second one. The second part of your question, fairly straightforward. The answer is the new project will pay for the difference in trips from what was there previously. So if the trips assigned to the previous use was 10 and the new is 20, then the difference would be 10, and that's what they would be required to pay.
And following up on that, you're telling me that credit, if you will, or discount for the existing use, because it's in a category, whether it's real or not, because it met that category, they're getting credit for that in order for us to meet the nexus that we have to meet to impose a fee at all? Is that the answer?
That's correct.
Okay. And because you brought up Albright as an example, this is probably a question for Mr. Schultz or Mr. Larson. My reading of the proposed initiative, unlike the example that Mr. Morley was given, is that the initiative is, if you will, it's putting a ceiling or a cap on the traffic impact fees as of the time that the plans are submitted or the building something is submitted, which I don't quite understand, but they're capping the traffic impact mitigation fees at a particular time such that whether we change these fees or not, Albright is not going to pay more if the initiative passes.
In reality, this won't affect the Albright project either way, regardless of whether the initiative passes or not. Where Albright is in the process and ready to pull building permits would be the time when they'd pay their traffic mitigation fee. So even if you approved a change tonight, you still have timelines. July 1st is the soonest this would become in effect. So it's a moot issue as to that project, regardless of whether the initiative passes or not.
Thanks.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yeah, a couple questions just for clarification. So we were at 600 per trip at the at this particular phase, and we're going to an 854, and that's a calculation increase of 42.4%.
Right.
Correct?
That's correct.
And I guess my question is, and that 42.4% is based on what? Is it based on the building index for San Francisco region of 43.5, or how is it we arrived at that number just to get ourselves to 854?
Yeah, sure. So if you look in the report at the attachment A, which gives you a list of our capital projects, it's the list of our capital projects that are affected by growth, or the percentage of those projects that are affected by growth, divided by the growth that's forecast in the census. So we also provided a worksheet on that, and we went through it quickly on the presentation as table 2 on page 3 of the staff report. So the mitigation impact fee eligible costs, which is Appendix A, a list of our projects in Appendix A. So that's $22.8 million roughly. From that, we subtract our existing traffic mitigation fee budget or fund balance of $2.1 million. So that leaves us with $20.6 million. Our average daily vehicle trips to be added is 24,000 based on census growth. So the best information we have on how fast the town is going to grow. And then it becomes a math exercise there to get to the 854.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we weren't just pulling this item out of the air, because I think that it's very important. We have not done this for a while. We have not made the move, and there are impacts, and we see them all the time. And I think that if you look at the other agencies that you listed exemplary, it's obvious that there are a number of different approaches that have been taken, some of which are fairly extraordinary in terms of the numbers. So our purposes are to, not just to hit a large number, it's to mitigate the impacts. And the impacts can be mitigated by how it is that we repair the damage to the streets because of the construction, traffic, or whatever, okay? So if you look at option 3, that seems to move us exponentially forward to the point where we can actually have a significant impact on the mitigations, whereas we couldn't at this point in time. And so what would be the issues that are the unforeseen circumstances? Because, sometimes you don't want to put yourself in a situation where, oh, we didn't expect that to happen. What would be the issues that we need to address that let's say, option 3 might present us in terms of consequences that might not be to our advantage?
I think I'd point back to some of the information we provided along the way, including sort of pricing ourselves out of the ballgame in terms of attracting businesses to the town. From council's perspective, I think that might be something you'd want to consider. From a public works director perspective, being able to do the work would be a great thing. I see some great projects out there that would be much more viable with an increased revenue stream. But I understand that there's a balance, and we need to achieve that balance. And so that's, I think, why we're here having this discussion.
I wanted to, if I might, I want to just make sure that we're clear that whatever consequences exist as a result of the decision we're going to make, we have as great a scan on that as we possibly can, because I don't want to come back in 6 months or a year and say, well, that's not too good, because now there's no possibility of a small business coming into downtown. And that to me would be a major consequence of something if we're not circumspect in how we develop this.
Mr. Larson.
2 comments. One, in response to the Vice Mayor's question earlier, I did consult with the town attorney, and only the first 2 buildings of the Albright project have been submitted for building permits at this point in time, and I'm looking to Joel to verify that. So the next phase of Albright may or may not be subject to this fee, and the attorney can comment on that, but only the first 2 buildings have already been submitted. As to the questions that were just raised, given, and it's probably based on state laws, it's been adjudicated for mitigation fees, but again, that's an issue I'd refer to the attorney across the state. The discounting, as you called it, or the base that's been set by an existing use, so you're not charging new development for what is already an apportioned share for that parcel of traffic, that would preclude the impact on virtually most small businesses downtown, because virtually all of the businesses downtown have an existing use, and unless the use was to come in a way which dramatically increased traffic by 10 or more trips a day, I think that occurrence is unlikely to happen under any of the 3 options.
Vice Mayor.
I think this is for Mr. Morley. Option 1, we do not recover costs of the impact, and that's just flat out stated in our staff report, correct?
That's correct.
Option 2, since we charge per trip for impact, obviously we recover the costs.
That's correct.
Option 3, how much of the costs do we recover? And can you tell me again why you're confident in how you've broken down the trips given the nexus requirements? I mean, are we going to lose money on the 11 to 50 category, on the 51 to?
Yes, the answer is yes. We will lose money on the 11 to 50 category because we're only recovering 25% of the cost per trip fee in that particular scenario.
Okay.
So, and the number of trips that we're generating is based on the ITE standard. So that's a number that we didn't mess with because there's a standard behind it. We didn't want to adjust what's accepted as an industry standard. So based on the use, there's an assigned number, assigned utilization, and we deferred to that.
And the nexus requirements set a cap, not a minimum, as the council's done for the last 20 years.
I have a question for staff. Being that this hasn't been addressed since 1994, essentially 20 years, would it make sense moving forward to have these fees be indexed for inflation, CPI adjustments? We
can certainly do that. I guess there's a couple of things that come into play there. One being the developers wanting to be able to nail down what the cost will be to them ahead of time, so that they can run the numbers on their projects. However, that being said, I think with if you're looking at an inflation-based adjustment on the project side, we can certainly bring that back on an annual basis through this exact same process, through the fees process.
Okay, so for instance, suppose that this year it was 600, now it's 854, the multiplier. Next year, the multiplier could be increased by 1.8% if that's what the CPI rate is.
Yeah, if I direct your attention to page 7 of the staff report, table 6 has an outline of the cost index, the ENR building cost index since 2009, and what the numbers have done. So you can see that they've been a little bit all over the place, but certainly we would tag to that for the coming years.
Thank you.
And that's exactly what we're proposing for the construction activity impact fee. When it goes from 1 to 112, that it then be indexed annually thereafter. We could certainly bring that forward to you every year as part of this fee process. We would have to base it on an estimated of the project cost increases, because it goes into an equation, and that's to retain the nexus. It's not that it's an inflation rate on the fee, it's an inflation rate on our project costs, which then rolls down to the fee.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion or questions at this point? Okay, well, at this point, we'll ask the speakers to come forward. You have 3 minutes. First card is Cecil Anderson, or Annison.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. I read the staff report, and I listened tonight, and it seems like it's very complicated. And what seems to me like, here's the situation that I got from the staff report. There's been an improvement in the local economy since 2010, more increase in development, more local traffic impacts. So the staff recommends modifying the fee. And the mitigation fees captured the impact of the development. They haven't changed since 1994, and the town reviews them periodically. Well, this is 20 years later. The current fee is discounted for uses that generate more than 10 trips, and the discount results in a lower cost per trip for large traffic generators. Therefore, the discount results in the town collecting less than is needed. So the town has to seek other funding sources or accept the traffic impacts. That kind of all follows. So the options are to increase the cost per trip, but charge the developers with more than 10 trips, 10 to 20% of the trip like we do now. Or to increase the cost per trip and everybody pays the same, where we recoup all of the expenses, or the progressive fee structure where we may not recoup all of the expenses. Am I the only one that thinks that number 2 is the most logical solution? What was good for Los Gatos in 1994 isn't necessarily good for Los Gatos in 2014. Many developments have been moving ahead, and traffic is a serious concern. Shouldn't the funds to mitigate traffic come from the developers that increase it? Option number 2 is fair, logical, and practical for developers to pay their fair share of traffic mitigation fees. Okay. On option 3, the big developers, if the concern is that big developers will be afraid of developing in Los Gatos because of the traffic mitigation fee, I seriously doubt it would scare them away. For instance, I looked at the chart for Albright. An extra $2 million for Albright wouldn't have had them bat an eye. So I encourage you to vote for option number 2. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jeff Lockridge.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lockridge, 109 Paseo Laura. Staff is recommending option 1, not option 2 or option 3 for the traffic mitigation fee update. That charges single-family residents in town a fee of $854. Staff proposes that even though they intend to charge each single-family resident the full $854 rate per new average daily trip, they intend to discount that rate by as much as 90% for developers who produce hundreds, if not thousands, of daily trips. Does this make sense to anyone? It doesn't make sense to me. Reward the people who put more cars on the road and penalize the town residents twice. Once because they have to pay the full rate and the developer doesn't, and a second time for having to put up with the same developer's traffic who they only pay a deeply discounted rate. Why does staff continue to act pro-developer rather than pro-residents? Some history. This fee has not changed or been updated since 1994, according to the staff report. During the last 20 years, has traffic increased in town? Who has paid for any improvements made to mitigate this traffic? How far do you think the current then and now $1 per square foot fee goes towards improving the traffic situation in town? Has anyone seen how the traffic situation in town has improved? Neither have I. In 2010, Los Gatos commissioned a traffic construction fee report. In it, the recommendation was to increase both of those fees since they were both outdated. While the construction fee was increased to $1 per square foot for the potential damage that construction does to our roadways, the traffic mitigation fee was not changed. Staff has concluded that most other jurisdictions that charge a traffic mitigation fee charge much more than Los Gatos. They have found other jurisdictions that don't have traffic mitigation fee per se. But let's not get caught up in the semantics of how these other jurisdictions are managing their traffic problems. Ours are here and now, and they aren't getting any better, they're getting worse. Developers should pay the full rate for all the new average daily trips that their developments produce. This includes all businesses too. At full price, no discounts, and exclusive of any community benefit. If anything, the Los Gatos town residents should be receiving a discount for having to put up with this traffic and parking situation. Los Gatos could use the full amount collected for the traffic impact mitigation across town. Please approve and adopt option 2 tonight. Los Gatos cannot afford to foot the bill for the damage developers do to our overburdened traffic situation a second longer. Please do not make the same mistake that the 2010 Town Council did. Don't delay this important decision. Please take a stand and approve option number 2. The creator of the traffic should pay, not the residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Next card is Jack Von Nada.
Jack Van Nada, short speech. I don't understand at all why we would have a recommendation on option 1. It loses money, and I don't think the town's in the business of losing money, taking money from one other place and then bringing it in to cover our losses in another, when it could be covered easily with this option 2. On the indexing of the fees, I think that's a great idea. It's probably a construction indexed instead of a CPI index, but since 1994, I would imagine that that fee would be considerably higher than $1.12. The other thing to consider is that the town is basically built out, that it's a high-demand town. I wouldn't be very scared of developers not coming to this town because of some fees. These fees are going to be paid up front basically once, and then it's into the cost of the business, and from then on they just continue to raise rent. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. That was the last card I have. If anybody else wishes to speak. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and move on to council for discussion. Vice Mayor.
I just have a process question, Mr. Mayor, and it's for you or through you to staff. Did staff want a motion, even though these are both number 3, do you want a motion with respect to the traffic impact fees before we move on to, and the construction fees before we move on to the comprehensive fee schedule? Is that the desire?
Staff would recommend that.
Okay.
Because then we can roll in the traffic into the final as well.
Further discussion, Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. So I might do a motion, but I might just talk for a minute. I keep going back to option number 3 because, we use the word developer in a broad way, and we're all thinking Albright or we're thinking North 40. But again, this applies to every type of use. And when I look at these charts, and I'll look at daycare, because daycare is not something that developers start. I mean, these are small businesses, and they're very much needed by our community. So for a daycare operation to open and have to pay $163,000 in traffic mitigation fees in order to serve our families is wrong. They won't open here. And so then what happens? So then our families have to go out of town to get childcare. And that's not good for traffic, and it's not good for environment, and it's certainly not good for family. And that's just an example of one type of business that is part of the fabric of the community that we need to encourage. So I know that it in some ways feels arbitrary, the division between how they've broken down 11 to 50 and so on in terms of increase. But I think it's something that we can work with and examine yearly and see how this is going and see what problems come up. So I think it's a good way for us to get started on playing catch up on getting some of the traffic mitigation fees that we need to get without putting in danger some of the types of businesses and new projects that we really need as a community. So having said all that, I think I will go ahead and make a motion and see what happens. And that would be to adopt a resolution amending the Town of Los Gatos traffic impact mitigation fees using option 3 as the structure. And also, do you want separate motions on the construction, or rule it separate on construction?
I would recommend that.
Okay, well, let me just make a motion then pursuing option 3 and see where that goes.
I have a question for staff. So supposing that I agree with Councilmember McNutt's comments about the daycare. I looked at that and the applicability of option number 2, and I thought that's, the type of business you don't want to levy those types of fees on. However, I was thinking, could we adopt potentially an option number 2 and specify that a business such as daycare be subject to option number 3?
Yeah, there are locations that do that, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Follow up on that question. Since the nexus that is required starts with a description of a use, you used coffee shop, whatever it might be, why wouldn't it be appropriate to break out a traffic impact mitigation fee with a description of a use rather than a number of trips?
So the ITE standard identifies an average use, an average trip count per use. So the schedule actually takes, for instance, coffee shops or small restaurants and gives them a number of trips associated with that particular use. It has a whole series of numbers, pages of uses that it identifies.
I understand that, but
Okay.
it's a related question to the mayor's question, which is, yes, he understands why daycare might be a problem and trying to work for a solution, and daycare must be a described use that has a certain number of trips associated with it with ITE, correct?
Correct.
So if the concern was we don't want to burden daycare with the fee that's associated with X number of trips, couldn't we just similarly use a description of a use and say, for this use, we're going to use this schedule?
Yes, and you did that in the past policy. There was a $120 fee for medical office.
Okay.
Up to the maximum level established on the Nexus study. You can't discount childcare, for example, and say single-family homes have to pay for that. You can't go above what the Nexus study allows.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Yes, I understand that there's a sense that the developers are getting away with something and that they're causing the impacts, and so we need to ratchet this up. But back to my question about the law of unintended consequences. I think we would be in difficult. I know it doesn't appeal to you, okay, but I'm going to say it anyway. In the law of unintended consequences, we have to make sure that we don't do something that's going to have a negative impact where we're not intending that. And when I saw that number for daycare, and that's a 3,500 square foot building. That's all we're talking about. Where it goes to 163K versus 77, up from 24. My sense is that we want to be consistent. I have difficulty in seeing us actually create some kind of methodology that then has to differentiate and therefore alter each use when we do have a standard that says that for this particular use, there is this number of trips that you're going to see. Just like we are looking at the fact that a vacant property isn't generating anything, but it did once upon a time. And therefore, we are going to accommodate the fact that this particular use did generate X number of trips, even though now these guys went out of business and so they're generating nothing. And it's reminiscent of a time when we said, well, if a business generated one new trip, we couldn't develop it. But that was the time when we weren't thinking about the fact that if the property is vacant, then it's gonna generate one new trip if you put something out there. That language existed for a very short period of time till we figured out it didn't work. For my purposes, I think that option 3 does give us what we're attempting to do, which is accommodate as much as we can within a kind of a logical constraint for those uses that we have proposed this progressive fee structure with. And it doesn't say that at a certain point in time we can't come back and adjust, but at this point in time, I'd rather see a consistent application that we can apply across the board and accomplish what we're attempting, which is to cost recovery. That's really what we're attempting to do. We're not attempting to create this huge bank. We're attempting to get cost recovery to a logical, rational kind of degree so that we can help pay the bills for the impacts that are occurring. It's not to get anybody, it's to basically make sure that we have some degree of cost recovery. So I'm with that in mind, I'm more than willing to second that motion that Councilwoman McNutt made, because I think that is I think it's a compromise, but I think it's a logical compromise given the kinds of consequences that could happen if we went strictly with option 2 as proposed.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have to think about what we know and what we don't know. What we know is that for 20 years, the traffic impact fees have not escalated, have not increased. So therefore, they're not paying their way. So what does that mean? That means that the deficit is made up by every single one of you who live in Los Gatos, including everybody up here. That is what is actually happening. That means the person who owns the daycare center, who may live in Los Gatos, is paying the deficit. That means the parents of the kids who are going to the daycare center, if they live in Los Gatos, are paying the deficit. That's the reality. Now, I know that if you go through this list on table 4, and you see things like apartment complex and subdivision and auto dealer, you say, okay, well, I can jump up their traffic impact fees. But then there's this one line item that says daycare center, and you go, ooh, that one hurts. Well, I don't think it's good planning. I've said this before. I don't think it's good planning to call out the one thing that may not, sit well with you. I think that any decision that we make has to be applicable to all of these uses. And I agree with those who have stated that we should go with the full cost recovery, applicable to all people, and then applicable and fair to everyone who lives in our town. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Vice Mayor.
I too will not be supporting the motion because, as Councilwoman Spector indicated, I think it's too uncertain to call out which we think are worthy and which we don't. That was the fate of the community benefit, which started as if it's more than 5 trips, we're not going to approve it. And then it was, well, is it something that has an overall benefit and asset to the community, which devolved into a fee, which isn't the right way to approach things. So what we're dealing with, as Councilwoman Spector said, is a quantifiable impact that's created by a traffic trip that's created by whatever increase in use there is by a big developer, a small developer, a restaurant, or a daycare center. And I don't think there's a lot of 3,500 square foot daycare centers in Los Gatos, by the way. I think lots of them are homes or they are at after school facilities or whatever they may be. So that one doesn't concern me too much. And I think we do need to be fair. And as has been pointed out, if it turns out that this isn't fair or it's not appropriate, we can certainly reconsider it. That's part of the staff recommendation for option 1. There's no reason why it can't be part of the recommendation for option 3, or I'm saying option 2. So I will not be supporting the motion.
So, Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate you letting me get one more sentence in before you speak. I just wanted to point out that the daycare is the vivid example that we have here, but I'm concerned about not just about daycare, but about businesses that we're not thinking about. And it certainly would be inappropriate for us to sit up here tonight and try to identify all the businesses or types of enterprises that would need to have an exception because they're a low-cost business model. But, it could be a yoga studio. It could be a nonprofit organization. I'm thinking one in particular that has a lot of coming and going because they're supporting cancer patients. There's we can't even speculate to list those all, but I'm concerned about impact on the small guys that we need in our fervor to try to get as many dollars as possible out of the big guys. So that's where I am.
All right. So I'll weigh in. It's difficult when you're looking at what things are now and what other communities are currently charging, and then you try to apply some more current numbers to what we could be or should be charging, and it looks like a big increase. There's compelling arguments on both sides, option 2 versus option 3. I'm leaning towards option 2 with the latter arguments that were made. I do have respect for some businesses. The idea that some businesses are may have difficulty in the future, but I think if we find that there are some issues, those can be dealt with later. I think it is best policy to keep it all the same for everybody and then see what happens moving forward. I will buy into that latter argument as opposed to trying to cherry pick or guess or make a decision about which businesses may or may not be eligible to pay. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. So the motion fails 2-3. And now we will look to council for further discussion or an alternative motion. Vice Mayor.
So I'll make an alternate motion that the Town of Los Gatos adopt a resolution amending the Town of Los Gatos traffic impact mitigation fees as provided for in Section 1570.035 of the Town Code, increasing the per trip fee to $854 and adopting the method that's indicated in option 2, which is the per trip cost. I would also like to add that on an annual basis or before, as needed or indicated by staff or by council members, that we review that structure and make sure that it is doing what we intend it to do and that doesn't have any unintended consequences, and then look at it again, and also include that it be looked at that annual review for a cost of living increase or other appropriate increase.
So we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
So it passes 3-2. So now, moving on to Part B of this.
We actually need a motion on the construction impact fee increase we're recommending.
That was the Part B I was considering.
I will move that we adopt the construction activity impact fee as is contained in our resolution, and remind me of the attachment, but we have a resolution adopting that for the $1.12, and that we specifically include an annual review to adjust that rate as appropriate for cost of living.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
And for the record, that is attachment 1 to the staff report.
Thank you, attachment 1.
So we have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. And now, I guess we will be moving on to our next phase of the comprehensive fee schedule discussion.
And Jennifer Callaway will be making the staff presentation. The Budget and Finance Manager with Director Steve Conway. On some of the public comments that were made previously, I did want to just highlight for the council that staff did recommend in 2010 changes to the traffic impact mitigation fee. The council did not take action at that time. Staff basically doesn't care if the council adopts, modifies, or rejects a staff recommendation. Staff recommendations are basically there to assist the council's determinations and decision. And the three options that were presented to you, 1 showed the status quo, 2 showed a full cost recovery, and the 3rd reflected prior council discussion. And given that the council discussion and decision was facilitated by the provision of those offices or those options, I want to commend Parks and Public Works staff for their preparation of that report.
Thank you. So we're ready for our report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm going to keep my comments brief tonight. I don't believe the presentation is working, but I'll summarize the slides that are in front of you. You have before you the staff report and the desk item for the proposed 2014-15 comprehensive fee and fine schedule. These fees are adopted annually, and that's per town policy, which requires us to recover costs rather than allowing the general fund to subsidize the costs that we could recover. You'll notice that the fee schedule this year is called the comprehensive fee and fine schedule. We have suggested incorporating the fines and penalties, so it's a one comprehensive document that we can look to for those fees and fines. You'll find in the staff report an attachment 3, which is a summary of the changes we're proposing. The first portion of attachment 3 is the increase by CPI. It was a 2.3% increase. Mostly those are development services fees. This is to recover cost of currently doing business and keeping up with the current cost of providing those services. In the second half of attachment 3, you find the proposed fee adjustments and recommendations. This is where you will find the summary of the fines and penalties that we've incorporated this year. In addition, you'll find fees that have been adopted so far this year, such as the single-use carry-out bags. You'll also see the commercial alarm registration fee, as we're proposing an increase to $50 from $35 to recover the costs. The electric vehicle charging station fee is a $3 one-time fee every time you plug in. That was not on the fee schedule previously, so we've added that. And also, there's a on-street parking electric vehicle fine, and that's to enforce a vehicle code that's in existence that prohibits a vehicle from parking in an electric charging station zone unless it's there to charge. So that's just a summary of what you'll see in attachment 3. In addition, staff is asking for some direction on the credit card usage. This was brought up at mid-year, where we are seeing an increase in the number of credit card payments that we're receiving for either building permits, business license, that sort of thing. The town has been absorbing those costs. It's been there is a fee in our fee schedule at 1.62%. There was legislation restricting us from enforcing that. That has since changed. So we can enforce that. If council wishes for us to do that, we would recommend increasing that to 2%, as that's more cost recovery for us in terms of the charges that we're paying the bank to use the fee. We would like to note that there's only a few other local agencies that do charge for credit cards processing. And it ranges from a 4% fee to a flat $2 fee. So we would be one of, I think there's only 4 others that we found so far that are doing that. So we would like some direction on that. We also plan we'll incorporate in the fee schedule upon approval the recommendation number 2 for the traffic mitigation fee, the $854 flat rate. I think that's on page 22 of the fee schedule, so we would make that change, as well as the construction activity fee of $1.12 per square foot that you just adopted. If there's any questions, we're available.
Thank you. Vice Mayor has a question.
I apologize. I have several questions about the fee structure. I'll try to make it fast. Fee schedule development services capital improvement tax. It's K on page 3, 18 cents per square feet. I'm assuming that's comparable with other jurisdictions. It's page 3, fee schedule development services.
Hi, this is Steve Conway, Director
Hi.
of Finance. I'll step in on this one. The because it's a construction tax, it's subject to voter approval, so that one is just until the voters elect to change that rate, it would stay until it went to a vote.
Is that the same for the utility tax?
Yeah, taxes have to be approved by the voters in general.
So this may be for planning, and I promise I'll be quick. Page 4, number 14, residential design guidelines. Is that a fee for the consulting architect, which we're reconsidering the role? Or is that a fee for a review by our staff?
Are you talking about page 4, item N?
N14.
That's the actual document.
Okay. Page 5, S, annexation fees. I'm just curious, again, why they're going up with more lot. Why shouldn't the fee go up? The fee's actually going down the more lots we annex. And why are we doing that? Is that another discount?
Okay. The policy of the town council in the past has been to encourage annexation, so that's why the costs have been kept down.
Okay. Then generally with zoning approvals, why are the fees for PDs different than other developments, generally less?
Is this a time and material basis? Is that? What
Let's
page
see,
are
it's
you
on page 13, A, 1, B, and D. It's also under rezoning. It's also under subdivisions.
But it's a time and is it time and material, actual cost? Is that what we're talking about?
Page 13 is zoning approvals.
Right, and planned developments are on page 15, item E.
I was just looking at the zoning approvals, page 13, A, 1, B, and D. The fee's different for planned development.
So A1...
1B and 1D.
Those are actually, that's for architecture and site approval for projects that are within a planned development. So that fee means that through the planned development process, the A&S has already been really looked at, and so therefore the work that needs to be done is significantly less than if it was a non-planned development project.
So you're confident as Community Development Director that we're recovering our costs for that on the planned developments from not giving them a discount?
Yeah, this was just a couple years ago where council reviewed these fees and reviewed the analysis and the time that was involved for those types of projects.
Okay. My last one is page 18, letter F, appeals number 2, which requires that an applicant pay 50% of the original application fee only if it's the town council remands to the planning commission where it finds no error. And that seems to me to encourage the town council to find an error. So why don't we either just not charge it when we remand it, or why don't we charge a full fee? Because we had this very issue came up last week with the reconsideration on Shannon Road, which was part of our new information. So I don't understand why we're calling out something different and particularly tying it to a finding of error or no error. It doesn't make sense to me. If the town council thinks it's appropriate to remand something, I think we should be able to do that. So I don't understand why we're doing that fee that way.
I believe that was when the we were looking at appeals and we had no fees, and so they were looking at options of how to do an appeal fee. And I'd have to go back and research why council came up with that solution regarding no error, or if an error was made.
If I might add,
okay.
Vice Mayor, given the work involved by the staff, which is the basis for all the fees, I think would be reasonably the same. The only exception might be if the council remanded a project back for new information, that there's new information that has to be considered by staff as it goes to the Planning Commission. I believe the council would have the discretion here to simply put the period after Planning Commission if you so chose, and that for any remand back, it would be 50% of the original application fee. And if the council wanted more flexibility to that, it could add or on a time and materials basis. That gives the council discretion.
Okay, I guess what I was positing is, to me, it would be time and materials, because I wouldn't want to encounter the same situation where somebody's coming back to reconsider almost entirely because of the fee that was involved. So it would allow, I think, the town council and the planning commission more flexibility to send things back if that was appropriate. But, I don't know what the cost of staff time is. Thank you.
Further discussion from council or questions of staff? If anybody in the audience wants to speak on this, I have no cards on this topic. Okay. So I have some questions for staff. I'll go forward. A lot of these fees to me seem that they've been in place for a long time, and I could cite some specific examples. But for instance, a $50 fine for discharging a firearm seems very insignificant to me for such a thing that could have a serious consequence, that it's almost not detrimental at all. You go out and you buy a pitcher of beer and a pizza and you spend $50. So I'm looking at a lot of these as possibly being very dated, or maybe we could get some more background on when a lot of these were last looked at.
The last fee study was done in 2010. So at that time, a consultant was hired, did some analysis and some benchmarking against some of the other local areas, and came back with recommendations. As far as the specifics as to which ones were updated, I don't have that in front of me, and maybe the town manager could respond to that, but that was when the last study itself was done.
I think I was confused for a moment, and I believe it's not the fees that are dated, it's the fine schedule that you're most concerned about.
That is correct.
And as we tried to address in the staff report, The fine and fee schedule is largely set by either state law or town code. State law we can't influence. If the council did want to identify or direct staff to identify certain fees that fines, excuse me, I made the same mistake, certain fines that the town controls that seem disproportionately low, we could review if it's in the town's discretion to change those fines, such as the firearms discharge. And if we have discretion to change those fines, bring it back with the May budget for modification.
I'd like to address a couple of those that have jumped out at me. One is the possess or ignite explosive fireworks and rockets, etc., $100. Being that I think we're going to be very prone to fires this season, I think that fine needs to be increased to where it's more noticeable than $100. I know we've had trouble with slingshots in town, and the fine for a slingshot is only $50. And to me, that should be increased substantially. Minors in possession of alcohol, $50. Discharge of a firearm in town, $50. I would like to see us put more importance by increasing the fines behind some of these things. And I don't want to pick through each and every one, but those are 4 that jumped out to me as being less than the price of a bottle of wine for the fine.
So might I suggest that if when a motion is made, if the maker of the motion concurs, they include language for staff to review town discretion for fines related to weapons, explosives, and alcohol. And if staff has discretion, we'll bring those back for review.
And illegal dumping was one more.
Okay.
I don't think fines would require a 60-day public notice either.
Yeah, and fines don't have the same schedule. We probably have more, unless it's a town code, then we have to go through the town code process. But fees in particular have to go through this notice period to be effective July 1. So if we brought the fines back to you no later than May for the budget, they would soon be effective in the new fiscal year.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion from council or questions of staff? Seeing none, I'll look to council for a motion. Any takers? Vice Mayor?
Okay, I'll make a motion to adopt the comprehensive fee schedule that's been presented to us with the changes that are incorporated and highlighted. I would also like to add to my motion that with respect to development services fees on page 18, letter F, appeals, number 2, that it be edited to indicate fee to remand applications from town council to planning commission, period, and then indicate that the fee X out 50% of original application fee and say fees based on actual cost of time and material. And then I don't think it's part of the motion, but to direct staff to look at the fines that were just summarized by Mr. Larson and the mayor to bring back to us for examination.
I'll second the motion. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously.
There was explicit council request regarding credit card discussion, and there was no direction provided to that.
I'm sorry, I just noticed my note on here regarding credit cards. I will include in my motion direction to staff to, or I make it part of the motion. I don't know if it's included in the
Separate motion at this
separate
point.
motion, that we increase our credit card fee to 2%, as recommended by staff.
I'll second. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Anything else?
And staff is presuming, given the motion to increase the rate, that given the change in state law, we will now start applying that fee come July 1.
I assumed it was the effective date of the changes to this fee schedule.
Correct.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you everybody for coming this evening. The meeting is adjourned.